Hello, and welcome to The Shift, where we speak with pioneers and innovators that are turning climate challenges into regeneration opportunities and new business models. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Emeritus Chair of the International Biochar Initiative and the U.S. Director of the Ithaka Institute, and truly one of the OGs and the pioneers in the biochar and the carbon removal and sustainability infrastructure space, Kathleen Draper. Kathleen, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for the invite.
We really appreciate your time today. And I think to get us kicked off, if you could tell us a little bit, I think some of our audience and the viewers might know this, but I figure let's start from the top. Just biochar. If you could define what it is, what got you interested in it, a little bit of sort of your on-ramp into the journey here with biochar carbon removal, if you could.
Sure. Well, after many years of trying to simplify what biochar is, I found an analogy that at least worked with my mom, and that is it's like burnt toast. So imagine taking any kind of organic matter, putting it in an oven, closing the door to limit the oxygen, cranking up the heat, and what comes out is this very unappetizing black substance. And that unappetizing thing is really a key part of it because when you put it in soil, the microbes there don't view it as a food source. So what you've actually done is you've turned up to 50% of that carbon that was a short-term carbon into a long-lasting carbon. And that's what everybody's getting really excited about these days is that sort of ability to rebalance atmospheric carbon with biochar.
It's interesting. That's one of the things that really got us into the journey on biochar, kind of about 4-ish years ago when we got the company going, is just the materiality of it as a climate solution, of just the abundance of the feedstocks and then how much of it you could sequester and all these commercial and ecological goods that you could do with the product along the way. It was pretty compelling. If you could talk maybe a little bit about, and tell me clearly if you see it different, but our view on it of the last few years is we've come to think about this in terms of biochar, three phases to it. There was the clearly the terra preta soils, the 1.0 and the Amazon that really, I think, got everybody's attention. And then, sort of the second generation, the 2.0 version of a lot of the existing biochar production today from biomass waste boilers, coming out of that. I think there's been a whole lot of great pioneering work done with that substance. As we've tried to get our business going, one of the things that we've really run into is trying to get buyers convinced that there's going to be consistency of delivery on the product. So we've looked at 3.0, if you will, to really intentionally make a physical product with market-driven specs that you need. If we've come to see it in that kind of three stair-step manner in our journey. Love to hear your thoughts on that, just the framework of thinking about that, or how you might see the opportunities for especially the 2.0 and the 3.0 versions of biochar out there.
Yeah, I agree. In order to scale, we really need to have buyer confidence, and that means consistency. It's been a little bit of the chicken or the egg scenario that there have been some big companies interested, but they're saying, hey, we need to be assured of consistent quality and high volumes to get the price down and to get them to dive in. The other part of it, though, is I think we didn't necessarily know what the appropriate parameters were for defining quality in different end use cases. So we've moved a lot on that. I mean, we knew pretty much for agriculture what it seemed to be, but less so when it came to concrete and asphalt and all these other things. So I think we're getting there. I think for me, 3.0 is also about valorizing the other co-products. We haven't done such a great job with that, and we're starting to see where we can use that excess heat for things other than just drying biomass, which I think is what we need to do. So we're getting there, and it's been a really fascinating, exciting journey, especially the last few years.
It's interesting. It kind of mirrors, our experience on the year's end. Is, when we got going, we said, okay, this is going to be easy. We're just going to make the char. Here they come, and this will, take right off. And wasn't the case. It was, our big impediment has been selling all the biochar, and it's a great point you raise because the more value we can create, everybody can create with these co-products. the lower that economic hurdle, becomes on the biochar to really get it going and scale. So a lot of flexible business model opportunities within the industry. So we're pretty excited about that. There's also been, what we've encountered too, is there's a bit of a lack of understanding around biochar out there, and just the public and markets also, and a lot of it's very fair because it's a new thing out there. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about general, how best to educate the public, policymakers, misunderstandings out there, because I think those are, it's one of those things. If they only saw it like we saw it, everybody would be all over it. But I think there's a little bit of that education process that needs to happen. If you could comment on that, that would be terrific too, Kathleen.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a number of different things that I've learned over the years. One is that it often comes off as too good to be true, and I'm guilty of that myself. Especially in my early days, we need to be a little bit more pragmatic about how we frame it, but also it all looks the same. And I think everybody makes the mistake in the beginning of my biochar can do everything that's ever been claimed in the name of biochar, which sets up unrealistic expectations from the consumer. So, yeah, I think we need to be very nuanced in the education without being overwhelming. I think we also need to have kind of, for lack of a better word, a roadmap for different industries, showcasing how it can help them to, become more resilient, to decarbonize, to become more circular. And those just haven't really been created. I did one years ago for the coffee industry, and I wish there were one of those for every industry out there, just to show what it can do, because more and more companies are getting interested, but they don't know how biochar can serve them specifically. And just to give you one example, I think data centers could benefit a lot from using biochar in concrete, in geothermal heat pump systems, and they're the ones that are buying a lot of the biochar carbon removal credits. Well, it would be great if they would package that with the biochar itself to help build demand for the product as well as the carbon credits.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a great point. We've run into this too. Is when we first got into it, and there's a bit of naivety on our part, admittedly, of it. Okay, this will be easy, and there'll be buyers all over for this. We initially focused on agriculture markets, kind of the typical playbook. And one of the things we ran into was just making the economics work was difficult, in just terms of the willingness to pay that was out there for the physical product. It didn't tie together through the business to get a rate of return, to raise capital and build facilities. You just needed more than growers are willing to pay for it today. I think that will change in future, but today that's the reality, and it caused us to do right what you were describing, to start to look at other markets out there. What is the playbook, the roadmap for these other markets? We've looked a lot at concrete and asphalt. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, where we kind of landed on the different market opportunities that we've determined. Remediation is probably the highest value use of it. So we've really focused on that over the last kind of 6-12 months of developing, consistently developing the properties and the specifications needed in the material for certain contaminant remediation applications. But we have no illusions that all of these other markets will scale at some point. We just think the highest value today is remediation to get after it. But concrete, asphalt, we think it's one of the biggest, massive volumes there. So we'd love to hear the impact that you could have in that, of how to crack those markets, because that's ultimately where we'd like to get it to a price point and have the data set that shows its efficacy there to really, really scale and have a big impact there.
Yeah. Well, just to go back for a second on the ag side of things, not only is it complicated and farmers are notoriously risk averse, but biochar reacts differently to different soils and weather and crops. So even if you had the most consistent biochar, the farmer's scenario differs massively. So I think when you switch to focus on a consumer product like concrete and asphalt, it's a little different. They still want the low cost, high volume, but they're making a very consistent product. So you having something consistent to offer is a huge benefit to them. I think the challenge up until very recently has been the economics of it, because what you're displacing in concrete and asphalt is super low cost. But with the debut of the carbon markets and the price going up, I think we're seeing a lot more interest, and it's becoming a lot more economically viable. So I've talked to a few concrete companies in the last few weeks doing research for my upcoming book, and they are very interested. Part of it's because of the embodied carbon pressure that some are feeling from regulatory and consumers, but it's also the performance enhancements that they can see with biochar, either in concrete or asphalt. In asphalt particularly, it can be worked on in cold weather, which is a huge benefit in the colder climates. It enhances durability, heat resistance, and things like that. And on the concrete side, it can help increase curing, and depending on the recipe, can do all sorts of other things. So I think we need to tell that whole picture, not just how much carbon can be sequestered, but what are the performance enhancements. And then you don't have to be so glued to price points if you have performance impacts.
That that's great to hear, because as we get to really leaning into the just such a resource constrained world on this, as we get crack the code on remediation and move into concrete and cement and these sort of applications, our thought on it has been that people price you as cement out there. So that's you wind up at that price point for the physical material. But then as you see all these other benefits, we heard from an interested party potential customer, but one of the points they brought up that we hadn't been thinking of that you'd mentioned was this accelerated cure time, is that all of this time waiting on concrete to hit a certain compressive strength is just wasted time. And if that can go quicker with biochar, which it does, and we've done some tests with an innovative company looking to trial, and it was a much quicker time to hit in certain compressive strength thresholds. So between that and then some of the other ancillary benefits around co-products, we can get it at a price eventually that works. So that to us would be nirvana to arrive at that point, because then it's impact at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And you don't have to have the highest quality biochar, meaning it might have elevated heavy metals or something like that, which would not work in soils, but could very well work in concrete asphalt.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've thought about that too, of kind of dirtier feedstock, so to speak, landfill avoidance material that maybe you get a tipping fee, and that can go into concrete where ag it couldn't, and it starts to maybe bring a business model together for you. But another thing I'd love to hear your thoughts on is just every day in the headlines you see something else about climate, and just the urgency of the problem of trying to get these business models to work out and be profitable where they can truly scale quickly. Is one of the things that we think about too are some of the other benefits that you can't really monetize today, because the MRV, the measurement reporting verification frameworks, are not well established in fairness. Is how do you think about a better framework around LCAs and MRVs to be able to monetize some of these other benefits of biochar? I'm thinking of avoided emissions, of a landfill, that you avoid methane. Hard to measure. I understand that's what holds a lot of people back. But if that could be monetized, then the price comes off the physical product for concrete. To unlock those opportunities would be huge on the LCA MRV front. So would love to hear your thoughts about state of play with regard to that aspect of the business.
Yeah, the carbon markets are definitely not my focus much these days, but I totally agree that if we're only looking at carbon sequestration, we are leaving money on the table. And especially when you look at methane, whether it's from dairy manure or landfills, they feel no pain when it comes to emitting methane. And if we could somehow, incentivize them to do better with that, I think it would be a game changer. and the economics would be better too. But until and unless farmers are measured on their methane emissions, or landfills are, or abandoned oil wells are, and regulated, then we probably won't have enough of an incentive just with the carbon credits, because normally that goes to the producer of the biochar. We need to incentivize the end users at the same time. And I think that really would be changing the game.
Yeah, that seems one of the biggest things that could happen from a policy point of view if that was able to work its way into the business models. Then this goes as my co-founder Tom Caston, who I know you know well, has done a lot of work on this very topic of trying to figure out exactly how much emissions do you avoid in the process of doing this that are not currently able to get in these business models. So
Mm-hmm.
great topic. Well, if you don't mind, Kathleen, can I maybe start to kind of wrap us up with a couple of just sort of quick fire questions? Curious to get your reaction to a few of these.
Sure.
If you had the crystal ball for the next 10 years of biochar, what do you think needs to happen for it to have the greatest impact? So when there's a stampede of people doing this, and 10 years from now, how would you see that the pieces of that puzzle coming together?
Well, I think you alluded to it already. And, for the past however long I've been in this, it's all been bottom up, but we do need some top down. And one of the ways I'd like to see that happen is to create these national biochar roadmaps that are integrated with nationally determined contributions, with national adaptation plans, so that there is a plan at the highest level for where the biochar industry needs to go to solve the most problems in a country or region. Having that spelled out would really help knit together a more cohesive strategy for rolling out biochar.
Interesting. Yeah, that would be terrific to see that come together over the next 10 years. Just similarly along that line of thinking, if you had a million bucks that you just had to invest, what needs to happen today to make this just absolutely be taken off so that stampede is underway 10 years from now, 5 years from now, even better?
Well, there's some really interesting product companies coming up. The startup phase, they're making biochar building materials, and I think I'd put my money there, mostly because I want those products in my house, but also because I think that helps build demand for the biochar, which again is a real hurdle for us to scale the industry. We need more than just fields for biochar. We need vertical markets, and I think there's some really, really interesting ones. There's folks putting it in insulation, in drywall, in bricks, not to mention asphalt and concrete, but a little higher valued products. That's where I'd probably spend my $1 million.
I'm sure that would be a very productive use of it. Let me ask you on the policy front, because I for one think that enlightened policy is going to play a big role in getting this to go quick. If you had an audience of the high impact capable policymakers, national, statewide, all in a room, what would you want them to know about biochar? Anything that you'd like to be front and center on all their collective minds as they think about how to use their positions to have an impact on climate?
Well, I think I'll borrow from what I have seen in Denmark, which is an amazing collaboration between policy and academia and commerce. They view pyrolysis and biochar as the biggest opportunity they're going to see in this decade, if not century, kind of like they did with wind. So what I would say to people is, it doesn't even have to be the climate, discussion, but this is a huge opportunity for resilience and for things like disaster recovery. We need to be looking at pyrolysis and biochar through all these different lenses and see the jobs that can be created and just how we can use resources more wisely, clean up things that desperately need cleaning up. Yeah, it would be this broader lens, not just climate, but this is a huge economic opportunity that we
It's
don't want to
interesting.
miss.
It's an interesting point. It's one of the things that really attracted us to this. You're not just relying on CDR credits, so to speak on this. You can generate investor returns, you can make great jobs, along the way. And then there's this physical product that does all of these other goods that you have. So it's yeah, that's interesting to hear the Denmark example. In line with that of the Denmark example, are there any others uh, you know people we should be thinking about for future interviews on the program, or other real pillars of success that are occurring in the world that we should be looking to highlight?
Probably dozens. I tend to focus more on the built environment. So there's some really interesting stuff that a company called Char is doing in Taiwan. They're doing biochar infused concrete and using it to rebuild coral reefs around Taiwan. Amazing little startup. There's another company in Thailand. My friends Kum and Nua are doing a lot with bamboo biochar in the built environment. In India, there's a group called the Heartfulness Institute that is using biochar to recharge aquifers, and they've had amazing success. And one of the companies I visited in Denmark, which I think has a laser focused approach, is called Aqua Green, and they're doing sewage sludge carbonization, which I think is a huge opportunity because it solves so many problems that we have with that industry. So yeah, there's just lots of people that are doing amazing things.
Oh, that's terrific. Yeah, lots of great people to highlight and spotlight on the journey here. Let me ask you, one more question before we start kind of wrapping it up here. In line with the name of the podcast, the shift. If you could recommend one shift in everybody's collective thinking, what big shift, either thinking or in the physical world, an approach to regulation, doing things. What's the biggest shift, if you could, that you would think would have the most impact on helping us mitigate the climate challenges in front of us here?
Well, I was about to say, and then you tagged on the climate challenge, that we are lucky when it comes to biochar as a CDR technology that we don't always have to use the climate change frame. And I have learned over the years, because I live in a very conservative area of New York, that it turns off a lot of people. And so especially when I talk to farmers, that's the last thing I talk about. And we can do that. There's so many different frames to use with biochar. We just have to know your audience and what matters to them, and how biochar can be made interesting and fascinating to them. And I've seen it happen over and over again, including with my parents, that I don't need to mention climate change for them to get interested in biochar. And I think we need to do a better job at that, particularly right now.
That's an awesome point, and I find myself guilty of it oftentimes too. But I've often heard it said that one of the best ways to be successful and persuasive with people is to meet them where they are. And I think that's a very important point that you bring up that we should all keep in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, excellent. Well, Kathleen, I'd like you thank you so much for joining us, here on the shift. I'd like to thank our audience and the viewers for watching the podcast. We'll include links to Kathleen's work, especially her upcoming book, Dwelling on Drawdown. Just really want to thank you tremendously for everything that you've done in the space. Been a real pioneer in it. The trailblazing you've done has helped companies like us get going, and we hope to again see that stampede as quick as we can, where many more people coming in here to solve all sorts of problems with all the circular benefits that biochar industries can provide.
Yeah, I agree. And thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. No, and viewers, if you could please click on subscribe if you like the podcast. We're grateful for your time, and we look forward to having much more great content out there for everybody to view.